I'm looking most forward to the democratization of philanthropy. In an ideal world, I've described this to plenty of people, my job wouldn't exist. Philanthropy will always be a part of our society. Charity will always be a part of American culture. But how it shows up and how it's shepherded through communities needs to change.
Welcome to the Philanthropy Masterminds podcast, brought to you by DonorSearch, the show that takes you inside the lives of thought leaders, innovators, and changemakers in fundraising, philanthropy, and civil society. I'm your host, Jay Frost. In this episode, I speak with Sean McCarthy, honored as Outstanding Young Professional by the Association of Fundraising Professionals, an award reserved for individuals under 31 displaying excellence in raising funds, inspiring donors, managing campaigns, and demonstrating dedication to the charitable sector. Following corporate and foundation fundraising successes at both the Center for American Progress and CSIS, Sean took on the role of development manager at the National Center for Transgender Equality, advocating for trans youth, conducting groundbreaking surveys, and increasing corporate support 100-fold in just over 2 years. Today, Sean serves as development manager at the National Housing Trust, which works to protect and improve existing affordable rental homes so that low-income individuals and families can live in quality neighborhoods with access to opportunity. I spoke with Sean about reimagining philanthropy for the 21st century and how both donors and fundraisers must be held to a higher standard. Tell me a little bit about your work here at National Housing Trust.
Absolutely, I'd love to. So my name's Sean McCarthy, and I'm the development manager here at the National Housing Trust. The National Housing Trust is dedicated to preserving and rehabilitating affordable housing across the United States, with a concentration here in the DC region. And our primary focus is to ensure that residents are set up for success, guaranteeing that they have holistic support systems in place, not only to provide them with adequate and consistent shelter, but also to ensure that they are achieving results in other areas of life, including the workforce, education, building systems of support, consistent across their needs, and ultimately just creating more sustainable and resilient communities. I think that's kind of our North Star as an organization. And for almost 37 years now, we have dedicated ourselves to the most vulnerable communities. Most of the people that we serve here at the National Housing Trust are low income. They are Black and brown people, and they are individuals that have existed on the margins of society, that have consistently been ignored and left behind in policymaking. And so what we strive to do is not only advocate for policies that are going to protect the most vulnerable and safeguard their needs, but also providing that direct service to ensure that they are benefiting from the policies that we advocate for and that ultimately are implemented into the public sphere. I'm incredibly proud to be here, incredibly honored and privileged to fundraise for this organization. We are a small but mighty nonprofit, and I look forward to making a significant difference in this role.
This is relatively new for you. So when did you start?
Yes, this is a new position. So I started at the National Housing Trust in mid-February. Mm-hmm. Previously, I was with the National Center for Transgender Equality, conducting very similar work as a development manager, liaising with corporate supporters and institutional grant makers. Here at the National Housing Trust, I do very much of the same. I am the principal fundraiser for the organization, which means that I'm responsible for interacting with institutional supporters, individual donors, members of the organization. We do have a small membership program, and just making sure that I'm properly stewarding those relationships and guaranteeing that they have access to our organization, that they understand the achievements that we are that we're reaching as an organization, and that they are familiar with our activities, with our initiatives, and what we hope to accomplish within the next 5 years under our new strategic plan.
And I do want to ask you about that, but before we go there, can you paint a picture of what the need is? Because there are many people in the United States who still don't have a picture of what the housing crisis is like. Yeah. And especially in a place like DC, maybe you could even start there, what it's like when you come into the Capitol and there are people obviously intense all over the city, and that's only the visible end of the housing crisis.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll just begin with my perspective, which is that I recognize housing as fundamental to individual and community prosperity. I think that everything begins with housing. When you have housing that's consistent, safe, that allows you to live with dignity, you can then address other areas of your life that are experiencing a deficit, such as your health, your financial situation, your food security, your education, and so I do consider housing as sort of like that foundation of human success, of human vitality. I think a common misconception that a lot of people outside of the affordable housing movement don't understand or may have is that housing is not really solving for the housing crisis, and identifying housing solutions is not really something that the federal government does. The federal government has played a very important role in our industry, especially in the formation of housing tax credits, which many people are familiar with, and which allows us to develop affordable housing communities and create an incentive within the market for that development. But aside from that, most of the regulation and allocation plans that are put in place to encourage housing development and affordable housing development lies with the states. Every state has a housing finance agency that controls their approach to affordable housing development, and every state has taken a different approach to solving their own affordable housing crisis. But what we've discovered here at the National Housing Trust is that the affordable housing crisis is a nationwide issue. I think we're all very familiar with the difficulties that our communities are encountering with affordable housing, the issues that we experience as individuals when we struggle to afford rent or we struggle to purchase a home. Younger generations are increasingly unable to purchase a home, to invest in the capital that's necessary to have a permanent place of residence. And so that's making them more prone to eviction. It's making them more prone to, financial instability and other concerns that are impacting their life. And so what we seek to do at the National Housing Trust is create and I think centralize solutions for the affordable housing crisis. We are, an incubator for solutions by interacting directly with housing finance agencies and other affordable housing stakeholders at the state level to ensure that they have the resources and information they need to make informed decisions about affordable housing solutions. One of the ways that we accomplish that is through our technical assistance. We advise on qualified allocation plans, which describe how housing finance agencies equitably distribute resources to affordable housing developers based on certain incentives. So one of our greatest, I think, strengths as an organization is not only have we identified the need to solve for the affordable housing crisis, but we're doing so in a very creative and agile way. When we consider some of the solutions that we would like to develop in partnership with these agencies and with these other stakeholders, we examine sustainability, we examine green energy, we examine community dynamics and demonstrated needs like transportation and access to different models and models of care and service. And that is something that I think goes under-recognized when when solutions are being discussed. And so what we choose to do is we bring ourselves to the table, and we're ensuring that whatever discussions and solutions or whatever solutions are discussed at the table are taking that holistic approach to support and care that our constituents desperately need.
The scope of this is massive. So when you talk about it individually, it's helpful for people to know and remember what it's like to pay the rent or to pay a mortgage payment or to try to find a place to live. Exactly. That's something that is somewhat universal now. But the scope of the problem for people who have no place to sleep tonight may not be visible to everyone. What's the scope of the problem today that you're trying to address here? Absolutely.
Well, I think what many people struggle to understand is there is visible poverty, like you've suggested, where you're navigating your neighborhood and you're seeing visibly homeless people who are unable to afford a home or receive shelter of any kind. But then there's also poverty that flies under the radar. For many of our constituents here at the National Housing Trust, who rent directly through our property management entity, their average income is less than $15,000 a year. That is less than 50%, maybe less than 30% of the federal poverty line.
Right, and that federal poverty line is a national line.
It's a national line, right?
It's different in New York to live under that than it is in, I don't know where.
Exactly.
Boise.
It's a national line. It
Right.
doesn't address the nuances in the diverse community needs that we see across the country. And it also is calculated using a formula, an archaic formula that doesn't necessarily apply to the needs of today's citizens. Right. And so we use that measure because we recognize it as the most consistent measure. It's the measure that allows us to, target support towards communities with greatest need. But when we talk about our constituents, these are individuals that are on the verge of destitution. And so as an organization, what we seek to do is make sure that they have that housing stability that, again, is fundamental to their success. It is fundamental to their human development. And we don't just believe in providing housing and then stepping away, because we recognize that, again, solutions do not operate in a vacuum. And so what we choose to do is deliver those housing solutions, but then also support our residents along the way after they've attained housing, after they've gained housing stability. What else can we do to give them support? What else can we do to make sure that the housing they live in is dignified, that it honors their needs, that it respects their individual priorities, and that it isn't simply an afterthought for our communities. It isn't an afterthought for our federal agencies or our state agencies, but that housing solutions remain at the forefront of public policy decision making.
And you're dealing with a very diverse population, even within all those that you're serving. Absolutely. Through all this work, and that where the need is for housing in the United States. So I'm sure that making sure that you are listening to and addressing those needs is one of the chief challenges, right? I mean, and then to be able to interpret that and help convey it to people who might be supportive of it, but haven't necessarily lived that experience.
Exactly. I think one of NHT's greatest strengths as an organization is that we are choosing to put policy into practice. We began as a policy organization, conducting research, advocating in front of policymakers at the federal and state level, and just ultimately being a clearinghouse for affordable housing policy and decision making. But along the way, we recognized that policy making wasn't enough. It wasn't driving forward the solutions that we needed to see implemented yesterday. And so when we came to that realization, we decided to also expand our role as a developer and as an asset manager. And so now, in partnership with NHT Communities, which is our sibling organization, we are empowered to not just conduct that policy research, perform that advocacy, and deliver that technical assistance, but also to take our learnings and findings in the field and apply them directly to people with the greatest need. And that's what we're accomplishing through NHT Communities. We rehabilitate aging properties. We preserve affordable housing, both intentional affordable housing and naturally occurring affordable housing. And we're guaranteeing that our neighborhoods are equitably developed, that they are supportive of individuals from a variety of socioeconomic backgrounds, and that they are not supporting or prioritizing the most privileged individuals, which we are seeing occur more and more often as housing becomes increasingly unattainable for the most marginalized communities here in the United States.
Right.
So we're incredibly lucky to be working in the field, developing these properties, both through preservation and new construction. And then once we've moved individuals with the greatest need into these properties, fostering their development, nurturing their well-being, and just, I think, ultimately creating more sustainable and resilient communities, which is, I think, once again, just foundational to some of the greatest, I think effectively addressing some of the greatest challenges that we as a country are going to face within the next 2 decades, primarily climate change, inflation, and other concerns regarding our country's progress.
Talk with me a little bit about what it's like to fundraise for that, and especially those two big areas. One is advocacy, which might appeal to some people, but not to others. And then another is this implementation aspect. And I should also ask, are the organizations, NHT and the communities, are they both not-for-profit entities?
They are both 501c3s.
Okay.
Yes.
So you're raising money for both. And what is how do you talk to people about it? Who's the likely constituency to support it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, affordable housing and community development, equitable community development in particular, is something that appeals to everyone. And when I'm approaching when I represent the two organizations and I approach my fundraising strategy, I identify what resonates most with our supporters and with the people that care about us. We are such a diverse and dynamic organization that I have the benefit of presenting multiple ideas, programs, initiatives, and solutions before our community of donors and supporters. This is an advantage for me because it gives me the opportunity to, materially connect with the individuals that care about our work by addressing what I think seems most attractive to them, by focusing and centering our conversation on the issue areas and the initiatives that are, that drive their interest in our work and that connect them to our mission. That's, I think, something that I'm still learning, especially within these first 2 months of employment here at NHT. But it's given me, I think, the flexibility to develop those robust and mutually beneficial relationships by understanding what drives your passion for our work. Is it development? Is it the preservation piece? Is it actually seeing the buildings be constructed in your community? Or is it the advocacy? Is it, advocating for the preservation of low-income housing tax credits? And is it educating lawmakers and other key decision makers on why affordable housing policy at the federal and state level must be attended to? So I think when I'm speaking with donors, when I'm building those relationships, and I think this applies both to individuals and to institutional donors, I'm focusing on what resonates most with them. And I think that NHT's ability to deftly adapt to the shifting needs of our movement, gives me that freedom to discuss our work in a way that is aspirational, is transformative, and is adaptable to, I think the changing circumstances regarding the affordable housing ecosystem.
Can we go back a little bit to what you were doing last? Because you're dealing in this work with vulnerable populations, but as you put it, in something that in the right hands with the right story, talking to the right people is very relatable. Absolutely. That whether you have a lot of money or very little, you've probably tried to figure out, well, how am I going to move into the next place? So in a way, we all understand housing because most of us want it, need it, have it, or are looking for it.
Exactly.
This is maybe a little different from your last work, but it's you're again dealing with a population which is especially now increasingly vulnerable, especially under policy. So can you talk a little bit about that work and maybe the similarities and differences in comparison to what you're doing today?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I would say what's driving both the National Center for Transgender Equality and the National Housing Trust is that storytelling component. It's centering the voices of the people that we serve in our communities, whether that's, at NCTE, it was transgender people. It was highlighting trans joy and celebrating trans experiences. Here at the National Housing Trust, it's spotlighting our residents. It's allowing them the platform to speak up about their needs and actually giving them the microphone to talk about their lives and how they've overcome challenges and difficulties, instead of us as a nonprofit stepping in to speak for them, because that is not our place to do. So that storytelling piece is hugely important. I found that donors resonate strongest when they hear those stories, when they see those stories, and when they can, uplift those stories both among themselves and within their communities. I think storytelling is an incredibly powerful tool to advancing change, and really, I think, transforming hearts and minds, which is, I think, at the core of the missions of both NHT and NCTE when we talk about educating folks and building compassion and empathy within our communities. And I would say those are definitely the similarities. I think where the two organizations differ, I think, is just about the issue areas that they address and how we need to develop distinct strategies to challenge some of the messaging that is opposite of our work and of our organization. I think that at NCTE in particular, we were up against incredibly damaging rhetoric and vitriol that was targeting the transgender community, and I think left us often in a reactive position as we were attempting to address some of that vitriol and just damaging messaging. And then I think here at NHT, it's more so, I think a lack of understanding, in that we're not really, there's no one that's really against affordable housing. We all think affordable housing is important. We all recognize it's a necessity, but what we're facing is really just a lack of concern, or I would say almost an ambivalence to affordable housing solutions. And so as an organization, the messaging that we're reacting to is sort of, again, indifference. It's messaging that just isn't really exist, or it's messaging that's not achieving the goals and objectives that we've identified as necessary to our movement. And so, we're uplifting those stories again. But I think between the two organizations, the same solution has been storytelling. It has been bringing those stories to the forefront so that the conversation is taking place in every room. I think that I have been so moved by seeing people react so positively to those stories, and have even disclosed to me as a fundraiser, but also as a liaison and representative for these organizations, that it was our stories, it was our ability to center the voices of the communities and constituents that we're serving that motivated them to contribute to our organization and to be a part of our movement, because they cared about hearing the people that we're impacting, that we're affecting. And that has been incredibly inspiring to me. I just look forward to continuing that great work.
Can you talk about maybe something that was among the biggest surprises at both of these places? I know this is a shorter runway for you here, but in both cases, while the missions are very different, you're dealing with people who are often vulnerable in one form or another, whether it's by this direct assault through public policy or politics, or whether it's just through ambivalence. Mm-hmm. But I'm sure that not only was it enriching and moving to be able to hear stories of these people that you're working with and allowing their voices to be heard through these organizations, but there are probably some things that really surprised you and maybe were helpful ultimately in fundraising. What were some of the biggest surprises?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say I was most surprised. I think with both organizations, I'm most surprised by the, honestly, the levels of enthusiasm that exist among different communities regarding our work. I think you should never, and this is just, I think, the greatest advice I can give to any other fundraiser, you should never discount any member of a single community or any community in general when considering, developing partnerships or other opportunities to build relationships with supporters. I think at, the National Center for Transgender Equality in particular, we had an image of what a donor to our organization looked like. And when I arrived at the organization, I made immediate assumptions about what our donor pipeline might look like, what our donor base was. I say I probably have done the same to a degree, even here at NHT, because when you arrive at any new organization or you begin fundraising for any new organization, you're going to make assumptions about who your donors are. But consistently, I've been surprised every time. Your donor is probably not the person that you picture in your head when you first join an organization. And as you begin to learn about your donor base and who cares most about your work, you identify some really surprising characteristics that I think you can leverage to the benefit of your organization. And I think that demonstrates that the work you're conducting is not restricted to a specific community. It's not restricted to a specific group. You may be focusing your attention on the well-being of a specific constituency, but ultimately, whoever cares about your work could be anyone. And I've been most, pleased with, these relationships that I've managed to develop with diversity of institutional and individual supporters who normally may not necessarily be proponents of, your work or your mission, but they've been educated. They've understood what you do. And it's so exciting, I think, especially at both organizations, but especially at NCTE when I was there, to meet with a donor who wasn't as familiar with our work or with our vision and what we seek to accomplish through our programs and initiatives. And not only to educate them about the work that we're doing, but also to educate them about the experiences and livelihoods of transgender people. The more that you can transform minds and outlooks for the better, it will be to the benefit of your entire mission and the community that you serve. And so I think in a similar vein, here at NHT, I've been able to connect with and meet with individuals and institutional supporters, both current and prospective, who are excited about our work, but may not fully understand our purpose or what what we seek to accomplish or do as an organization. And so it's so rewarding to be in that room and to speak with those individuals and provide them with that, connection to the organization that immediately sparks their interest. And you can almost see it in their eyes. When you say something about your organization, whether it's a specific initiative or program or even history about your organization, and their eyes light up, it's automatic. And it's so awesome to see.
This sounds like a great argument for actually meeting with people in real life, if possible.
Yes.
Or at least in some way that you can
face-to-face. I'm a huge proponent of face-to-face contact.
Okay, and this is important also across all these populations you're talking about, those we partner with to help them, and those who we need their resources in order to help others. And part of that population is younger. And I'm not going to generalize or use any of these marketing terms because I think it's dangerous territory. But you were awarded, of course, this prize through AFP, recognition for your work as someone under 30 or under 31. I guess it is at AFP. I'm trying to remember what the number is.
It's a bit of an odd age, but yes.
it's an odd age. But the reason I'm pointing to this is that there have been, like about everything else in society, massive generalizations about what people will and won't do on the basis of who they are, where they come from, what their experience is, what they look like, you name it. And one of those things has definitely been about youth versus whatever non-youth is. And so the reason I mention this is because I wonder if you've seen an opportunity for emerging donors, especially younger donors, however you define that, to have greater agency, to take a greater role in determining how philanthropy will play out, what our role in society is, the organizations we work with, and the terms of those agreements for the work we do together. As you've talked to lots of different people and sat down with them face to face, Are you finding there's an opportunity, especially with the younger emerging donors in this conversation?
Absolutely. I think there's the obvious, which is that we are about to witness one of the largest wealth transfers, generational wealth transfers in history from older generations to younger generations within the next 10 to 20 years. But separate of that, I think when you look at the younger generation and their approaches to personal and group philanthropy, I think it shares similarities with older generations' approaches to philanthropy, but they're choosing to be more selective about their philanthropy, and they're choosing to direct their resources and support, which they know they have, to institutions and organizations that are making what I've seen most often is really like that material impact, that demonstrated impact in their communities, whether that's through grassroots organizing, whether that's through resource development, whether that's through mobilization efforts. I'm seeing more younger people draw attention to nonprofits that are action-oriented, and that I think are challenging the systems of philanthropy and the models of the nonprofit industry, that I think galvanizes attention and support from younger people. So it may seem like it's antithetical to, a nonprofit to be so hypercritical of the philanthropic industry, but it is to their benefit, because what we're seeing is this outcry for the philanthropic industry and the nonprofit industry to hold itself accountable to the legacy systems that have perpetuated racism, exclusion, and barriers to success for decades, if not generations, in this country.
This is a hard conversation to have, though. Even though it's going on everywhere, it seems like it's in different buckets, in even different language as people discuss these issues. So as you are talking to now a broader audience, especially through your recognition from AFP, how are you entering into that conversation to help people across the spectrum of conversation, language, and age recognize that we need to do things maybe in a different way in order to achieve the objectives of the future, not the past?
Yeah, I would say I'm a firm believer in incremental change. So when I'm talking to any audience, making sure that I'm focusing my solutions on things that we can do today, things we can do tomorrow, right? And not necessarily things that are going to happen overnight. I think that resonates strongly with donors and supporters of all generations, because I think every donor who is philanthropically involved in any way, whether that's someone who's contributing small annual gift or someone who is a principal donor, they all care similarly about how their gifts are stewarded by nonprofits, and how nonprofits are evolving and growing to meet the demands of our changing society. And so I think as fundraisers, we are privileged to be able to have these conversations and to present these solutions because we are in the field and we've witnessed firsthand the challenges and issues that exist within the philanthropic industry. And so when I enter any space and when I have these conversations, whether they're one-on-one or to a group, I use that authority that I've developed as a fundraiser to justify why these conversations, these difficult conversations that we're having, need to take place, and why some of these solutions that we're identifying as fundraisers should be observed and ultimately implemented. I think that as an industry, we need to hold ourselves accountable to a higher standard, because we're seeing, I think what we're seeing and what we're witnessing is this culture of especially among younger donors, I think this culture of frustration with and irritation with philanthropy and with private philanthropy and how it shows up in the nonprofit sector. And so what we need to do is dually educate younger generations about the importance of continuing philanthropy and why we still need resource development in nonprofits, but then also challenging the concepts of philanthropy, especially from the top down, beginning with some of those largest institutional grant makers that have, that have had, primary authority over the industry for so many years, challenging their beliefs and concepts and approaches to philanthropy, and then going down from there and challenging major donors and allowing them to really consider, like, what about philanthropy can we change? What about it needs to change? And, how as a collective can we address some of these concerns that have festered over the years and that have kind of, I think, to a degree, reached a boiling point within the past 2 to 3 years.
Right. So what are you most excited about as you look forward in this way, thinking about these issues, but also about the work you're doing right here, right now?
I'm looking most forward to the democratization of philanthropy. In an ideal world, I've described this to plenty of people, my job wouldn't exist. I think that, philanthropy will always be a part of our society. Mm-hmm. Charity will always be a part of American culture. We're one of the most charitable countries on the planet, and I love that about us. But how it shows up and how it's, shepherded through communities needs to change. We need to start focusing on communities with the greatest need. We need to start removing barriers to resources. We need to start prioritizing the interests and priorities of the beneficiary of the organization that is receiving funds, as opposed to the organization that is issuing funds. I understand that's a challenging conversation to have, because when you're dealing with financial investments, you want to make sure that you're conducting your due diligence and you're directing resources to organizations that have the capacity to manage those resources. And I think all of those important procedural systems should remain in place. I'm not suggesting that we just start handing out money to anyone. But I do think that we need to begin looking at, the areas of greatest need, and lending power to the people and institutions that have historically been underrepresented in our industry and in the nonprofit sector. We need to start calling upon institutional donors and individual donors to consider where they allocate their resources and to strategically bear in mind the importance of equity and diversity in our movements, ensuring that our resources are going to organizations led by people of color, that are staffed by people of color, that prioritize disability justice, gender justice, and economic well-being, and that, I think, again, center the voices of the people directly impacted. I think this was evidenced to me so strongly when I was at NCTE, because the LGBTQ equality movement is a crowded movement. There are a lot of organizations competing for limited resources to conduct great work. And all of those organizations have a role in place in the LGBTQ equality movement. That being said, some of those organizations are better positioned to address the crises impacting the LGBTQ movement today than others. And when you look at something like trans justice and trans liberation, the people best equipped to advance trans liberation are transgender people. And yet only, I think, less than 3%, maybe lower, philanthropic dollars go to trans-led organizations among LGBTQ grant makers. That's unacceptable. And it's a sign that LGBTQ grant makers are not listening to their grantees, are not conducting investigations into how they can properly steward their resources to ensure that the people directly impacted have the capacity and the ability, the resolve to tackle some of the greatest challenges. That's changing slightly, but it's still unfortunately too prevalent. within our industry. And it doesn't just apply to, NCTE and to trans-led organizations. I mean, it's impacted the affordable housing movement as well.
Sure.
And I think any movement is struggling with this imbalance of power between grant maker and grantee, between donor and beneficiary, and we need to right size that imbalance. And in order to do so, it's going to require people holding donors and philanthropists accountable to the needs of our movement. And I think the people that have the greatest ability and power to do that are the fundraisers that are serving as the primary liaisons between those two institutions.
The Philanthropy Masterminds podcast is underwritten by DonorSearch, the world leader in donor intelligence solutions. Our producer is Jack Frost. Our theme music is Be My Remedy, composed and performed by House of Say. You can subscribe to the Philanthropy Masterminds podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can find blogs, webcasts, and CFRE accredited webinars with our featured masterminds at DonorSearch.net or check the show notes and descriptions.